Welcome to part 2 of the nutrition module, where we talk specifically carbohydrates. Now, there are a lot of questions when it comes to nutrition, especially when it comes to carbohydrates. Should you have low carbs? Should you have high carbs? Should you have no carbs? The list goes on and on. In this video, you're going to understand the frameworks behind all of these questions so that you understand how to think about these questions in the first place and what foods are best for you and your goals. Now, first and foremost, let's talk the basics, and then we'll go from there. So we have two types of carbohydrates: complex and simple carbs. So complex carbohydrates are the ones that take longer to break down and process into energy in your bloodstream. The simple carbohydrates are the ones that are going to break down much more rapidly. So some people, when they say cut carbs, the reason they might say that is because they just don't respond well with simple carbs, so maybe complex carbs are best. Some people might not like carbs at all. It really varies, but you need to understand that carbs are going to come from your grains, they're going to come from your fruit, they're going to come from your pasta, your rice, potatoes, etc. Right? And so you can have zero carbs, but I personally don't believe it's sustainable over the long term. So I want this video to break down what types of carbs are best for you, because truly, our body's going to either tap into fats or carbs as its primary fuel source. And most people are not going to be able to sustain low or no carbs for the rest of their life. And it's just as simple as that. So in this video, you're going to understand what carbs you should be eating in your diet. Now, when it comes to complex carbs, I want you to think about the dark starches. So we have sweet potatoes, we have brown rice, we have purple potatoes, we have oats. Those are going to be more of your complex carbs. You can also think of whole wheat pasta as a complex carb. When it comes to simple carbs, I want you to think of white starches. So this would be white rice, white potatoes, white pasta, white bread, etc., etc., etc. Now, the only real difference is that the simple carbs, the white starches, are going to break down a lot more rapidly in your bloodstream, and they're going to be readily available for energy. So this means if you eat a piece of white bread, if you eat white rice, if you eat sugar, like candy, for example, not saying do that, but of course you are going to have candy or sugar at some point in your life. When you have these sources of energy, it's going to break down rapidly in your bloodstream. So this means if you time it before your workout, it can be beneficial for giving you energy that you're going to burn from your workout. And if you've heard somebody say like, oh, I'm going to burn off this candy or this sugar for my workout, there is some truth behind that. But the thing is, if you're not eating that right before your workout, then you're going to store it more likely as fat, and you're going to have this fluctuation of your blood sugar. Ideally, you want to stick to more of the whole choices, the whole food options that are going to work best for you over the long term. So the dark starches are typically the way to go. But if you are going to have the white starches, it's okay, just time them accordingly, because if you don't have them right before your workout, and I'm saying 30 to 45 minutes prior, then you're going to have this crash in energy, and you're going to probably have some symptoms like headache, low blood sugar, because the high blood sugar drops at some point. And so it's ideal that you choose more of the dark starches, and when you're going to have those white starches, just try to plan to have it either right before or potentially right after the workout, because again, it's going to break down into your bloodstream a lot more rapidly. So having it after the workout is good because it's going to help replace your glycogen stores. Your glycogen is basically the energy that your body is deriving from that carbohydrate. And that carbohydrate in the bloodstream, it breaks down into sugar in your body. And so it can be beneficial pre or post workout because your body just depleted all this energy and needs a replacement to prevent it from not being able to recover efficiently. And you want to get nutrients in your bloodstream quick, especially after a workout. Just like on the contrary, before a workout, you want to have rapid energy available so that you can use that energy, right? Now, with the dark starches, they're going to take a little bit longer to process in your bloodstream. And so something like a sweet potato, something like brown rice, something, like a whole wheat pasta, it will still give you energy, and it's going to give you more of that sustained long-term energy rather than that spike. But the only downfall of that is it takes a little bit longer for your body to actually break it down. And so knowing that, I think now you have a pretty good understanding of like when to eat what, right? And now, because a lot of these white starches break down rapidly, it's also going to allow your bloodstream to spike, and that can be a good thing if it's before or after workout. But if it's other points in the day, it's going to be tough to manage some of these issues, such as cravings. It might lead to overeating, and especially knowing that most of the sugars, the processed foods that have these white starches in there, it makes it very, very difficult to regulate your blood sugar. And now that might lead to you eating excess food, eating more and more food than you're actually hungry for, because your brain is just searching for more sugar, right? And so like, as you now know these things, it's important to factor in when you eat what, right? So like, okay, the dark starches, you have most of your meals, you have the darker starches, and the white starches, we try to refrain from them unless you're working on pre or post. That's not to say you can never have, mac and cheese or, the white bread or whatever when you're not about to work out, but just know that the downfall, the opposite side of that seesaw in a sense, is that you will be more likely to have a headache or to have this blood sugar spike because your blood sugar is going to go up and it's going to crash, right? So just be aware of these things, and this allows you to have more mindfulness around your eating patterns. Right, so now that you understand all of that, let's talk about why carbohydrates can also be an issue for some people and for a lot of people. Well, every single time you have a carbohydrate, you're also going to have water that attaches in there, right? So when you eat carbs, not just are you eating the carbs, but also there's water that's bonding to that carbohydrate, and this leads to things like bloating because there's water retention. So that means not just are you eating the carbs, but also in order for that carb to be pulled into your bloodstream, you also need water in there. So you're going to have more water around your midsection, maybe around your muscle cells, which is great before a workout or after a workout, but it's also going to lead to some sort of bloating most of the time. And so If you're, for example, going on a first date, it probably would be ideal to try to choose foods that make you feel good, not just mentally so you don't have as much of the brain fog, but also that you don't have much of that bloating, right? So knowing these sorts of things when you go out to a restaurant or when you're cooking at home breakfast and you know that you have the rest of the day you're going to be working, you don't want the brain fog, the fatigue, it's probably best that you go with either no carbs or the darker starch carbs. This doesn't mean that you can't ever have the white starches, but just choosing when you're going to have them is ideal. And now that you know these things, right, looking at what carb sources are best, you need to understand that it doesn't really matter what you eat. As long as you have those frameworks behind it, you're going to be okay, right? Now, I'm not saying eat candy bars or eat sugar, but just understand that when you do, there's a time and a place, and it's really about sacrificing and offsetting what you want in this situation, right? Like, do you want that rapid energy? Maybe you're going to go work out and you will burn it off, but maybe it's not ideal. Personally, what I do and what I teach to most of my clients is, just like you watching, choose ideally most of your carbohydrates coming from darker starches because it's going to allow your regulation of blood sugar to be a lot more steady, right? And if you stay away from the white starches, you're going to have so much more control over your hunger and you're not going to be overeating near as much. But just know that when you eat the white starches, it's not a bad thing. It's just you will have more of these cravings likely pop up. So now that you understand that, let's talk about like what food sources are actually best, right? So in a perfect world, when you're at home, you have all the groceries, they're healthy, they're quality foods. Go with foods like your potatoes, go with foods like your rice, go with foods like your pasta. If you're somebody that does not tolerate carbohydrates well, it might not be the carbohydrates themselves, it might be what's in the carbs. So for example, gluten does not respond well with everybody. Some people might not be able to tolerate gluten, and so that doesn't mean you can't have carbs, it just means that you should probably refrain from that gluten, right? So if you want to have pasta, and most pasta has gluten in there, this doesn't mean you can't have pasta anymore. Find something that's gluten-free, right? Something like banza pasta that's made from chickpeas that tastes very similar. It's gonna have a lot less carbs, and it's also gonna have, no gluten in there. Some people might also be eating carbs and think it's the enemy, but really it's the yeast inside, right? So find foods that don't have yeast. So look at the ingredients, right? These are simple ways of being able to still eat the foods you like without having to have all the consequences and the side effects, right? Of like not feeling ideal, etc. I know I also touched briefly on the fact that fruits break down into carbs, right? So this doesn't mean that like you should never eat fruit because it gives you carbs. Like you should still be able to enjoy these foods, but just know that when you eat a bunch of fruit, it's going to break down in your bloodstream as that quick sugar, right? Which isn't a bad or a good thing. It's just, this is how it is, right? So eating a fruit right after or right before workout is great, but also just because you're eating fruit, which a lot of people deem as healthy, doesn't mean that it's always ideal because it still breaks down the exact same way in your bloodstream. So fruit is great, but treat it just like these other simple sugars, right? Just like white bread, white rice, actual candy bars, whatever, etc. It's going to break down the same. Now, it's probably a lot better for you. It is a lot better for you than these processed items. But at least now you know, okay, like when do I time this carbohydrate and when do I time the opposite, right? So understand when you're going to have what, why you're going to have it, if the benefits outweigh the cons and vice versa. If not, then it's all good. Maybe you can still have it, but just understand there might be side effects that come with it. So if you're at a family function, if you're at some sort of event, it could be the fact that, hey, you choose that white bread, you choose to have the food that you know is not ideal, but now you're aware of it going into it, and you have more realization around like, okay, I'm gonna eat a food that I probably don't respond well with. Let me just be more mindful about it and make sure I don't overconsume. And also, as soon as you eat that food, understand that it will be very, very much more difficult to regulate if you're actually hungry, and you might still overeat even if you go in with the intention of not. So giving it more, mindfulness and being aware of it prior to is going to make a huge, huge difference. So you now understand what carbs are ideal, what carbs are not. Now, like I've talked about dark starches, white starches, ideally, going for the whole food options are best, right? So like if you had to choose between one or the other, you don't always have the best option available, choose the better one, right? So if you're out at a restaurant, for example, and they don't have, sweet potatoes there, they don't have brown rice, what are you going to do? Maybe don't be 0 to 100 and restrict yourself from having no carbs whatsoever, but maybe okay, I'm going to go, instead of the french fries, I'm going to go for a baked potato, right? Because it's more of a whole food option, right? It's not going to have all the oils and the fats in there, right? Or maybe you're out and about and they have, a mac and cheese dish, and the next other option that they have is bread. Like, okay, which one do you think you're going to respond well with? Well, maybe the mac and cheese has gluten in there. You don't respond well with gluten. You've noticed that. So you go with the bread that is gluten-free bread, for example, right? Like small things like this are easy ways to choose the better option when you don't have best available. And that really is a brief overview in a nutshell of carbohydrates, when to have them. And you also know now about carbohydrate timing. So the white starches, perfect 30 to 60 minutes prior to your workout or 30 to 60 minutes after, because again, prior to the workout, you're going to break them down much more rapidly. You're going to have this spike in energy, which is able to be used to your advantage, for that workout, to get more energy from your workout. And then maybe you leave the workout, you feel good. Or you have it right after the workout, it's going to rapidly refill your glycogen stores, which again is preventing your muscles from not getting the nutrients they need, because you need to understand your muscles are most receptive to actually pulling these nutrients into your bloodstream and absorbing and using them right after a workout and during the workout, right? So doing these things are key. And then if you're going to have the dark starches, know that that's probably the best option if you had to choose, but you might not always have the best option. So choose what's better, what's best. And the dark starches, throughout the daytime, when you want more of that sustained energy, you don't want to have that crash, you don't want to have the fatigue or the brain fog or this lack of focus when you're on, whether it be a work call or you're going in for the day. Just be mindful of these things, and it's going to allow you to understand what type of foods are best for the scenario. And maybe you choose the darker starches at times when you want that sustained energy without the crash. So that's an overview of carbohydrates. And the next video, we're going to talk about fats. Now, before we go into that video, you need to understand one thing. Now, when it comes to carbs and it comes to fats, our body is going to use one of the two as its primary fuel source, which means that if you have a lot of carbs in your bloodstream and you're eating a lot of carbs regularly, or if you haven't eaten carbs in a day or two, but you still have a lot of body fat, your body will still tap into the carbs because it has the sugar still in the bloodstream, right? If you have a lot of that and not a ton of fats, then your body's going to prefer to use that as energy. And that's just how it is. If you're on the opposite side of the spectrum and you are somebody that has done keto and is consistently doing keto, like I mentioned, it's not super sustainable. I don't always recommend it. It might work for you, but I don't think it will, to be just super transparent. If you're on that side of the spectrum, just understand you can still do it, but you need to have higher fats if your carbs are that low, because otherwise you're not going to have any energy to use, and your body's going to break down muscle mass as energy. So either higher carbs with lower fats or higher fats with lower carbs. Now, if you're out to eat, your best bet is choosing a meal that has one of the two. You don't want to go to eat, especially if you're somebody that wants to keep your blood sugar and your insulin, your body fat stores nice and even and regulated so you can continue to get leaner. If you're somebody in these shoes, which I know a lot of you guys are, right? Like if you're trying to lose weight, you want to have your fat stores come down. If you're trying to build muscle, you also want to have lower body fat because you're more receptive to actually deriving nutrients from the foods. So too high of fat stores is not going to help you really in any situation. The only time having high fat stores on your body is beneficial is if you have, a month that you're going without food. And to that point, like, I don't think you would be in this community. I think you would be probably stranded somewhere. So that being said, like, you need either one or the other. So if you're out to eat, if you don't have the high carb meal, go with the high fat meal, but try to refrain from having both. And it's not to say you cannot have these things, but it's going to be very tough to regulate your blood sugar, and it's going to be tough to not overeat and eat cravings, or have cravings, I should say, when both are elevated. So we could go for a meal like higher in fats, but lower in carbs, still getting your protein in, or you could go for something like higher carbs, lower fats. And ideally, sticking with one or the other is best because this allows your body to have this, regulation, and it's adjusted to the food you're eating. The more that you're back and forth, one day is high carb and low fat, the next day is high fat, low carb. If you're always constantly moving these variables, you're placing a lot of stress on your body, and that's going to increase your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, which leads to things like more fat gain. It leads to things like less ability to build muscle mass. So I hope this helps you guys out. In the next video, we're going to break down the fats and why they are so important for optimizing your hormones, and I'll see you guys in the next one.